Welcome to On The Prowl, Florida Panthers Style, Ep.14, with very special guest David Dwork. David, welcome. Thank you for stopping by today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invite. It's good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on here. Now, David covers the Panthers for the Hockey News. He's also host of the Hockey Show with Roy Bellamy. He's a member of the Professional Hockey Writers Association and a web journalist for WPLG Local 10 News. It sounds like you wear a lot of hats.
Well, you kind of have to if you want to be in this industry, right? Like you take what you can get. But the good thing is it's a job that I love, so none of it is anything that I don't enjoy. But yeah, it keeps me busy.
That's great. That's fantastic. So how did you get involved with hockey, everything, and end up writing for the Panthers for the Hockey News?
Well, I got involved with hockey. I grew up playing hockey here in South Florida. I also grew up like doing broadcasting in middle school and high school and stuff. So as I kind of became an adult, and I realized that playing hockey for a living wasn't really going to be a realistic option. I kind of went back to my scholastic roots and what I was really enjoyed, and it was the broadcasting journalistic realm, and pursued that as an adult. And gradually, after working in radio for a very long time, I started as an intern and worked my way up to be a producer and a host. I've been writing for the last decade for a couple different news stations here in South Florida, and that kind of brought me into covering the Panthers, which I've been doing for a while, if you count my radio years, but in terms of like the daily writing and all that stuff, just for the last few seasons. But it's been pretty spectacular because I've been following the team since they became a team, since I was a kid here in South Florida. So being able to cover them now and be around it and kind of do a lot of the things that I would have thought were crazy and cool when I was younger, it's something that it doesn't escape me. And it's something that I certainly remind myself to appreciate on a regular basis.
Well, it's great. And, very few of us get to actually live our dream. And it sounds like you've done that, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I absolutely love that. Today's podcast, I've called it Florida Panthers Style. And it's something that not too many teams have. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But last night, they beat the Jets. And, and I'm telling my wife, I'm like, you're not going to believe this. It's just like polar opposite. Now, we went to the game Thursday. It was our first game of the year. We have partial season tickets, and we get down there once a month to go to games. I said, from the drop of the puck last night, it was like they were a totally different team. What are your thoughts about last night's game?
I think it was interesting what Paul Maurice said afterwards, which was that instead of kind of bearing down and diving into the details, that they took a step back. They had their first like real true day off at home on Friday for the first time in a while, and really just kind of hitting the reset button and allowing the players who, as we've learned over the years, the players have a lot of responsibility with this team, just in terms of the way they police themselves. And Paul has them kind of running the bench on their own. The players took it upon themselves after those two games against the Devils, and they took their day off and they said, you know what, we really need to get back to, doing what we do, our identity as a team. And that's, physical play, 5-man defending, very fast, very fluid. And we saw them get back to that on Saturday against the Jets. And honestly, it kind of reminded me of last year's Stanley Cup final, when for, a good chunk of that, they looked anything but the team that had run all the way to the final and the team that we had seen for much of the last year and a half. And then for game 7, for whatever it took, they snapped right back into it, and they looked like themselves right off the jump in that game, as they did against Winnipeg on Saturday. So it's good that this team has that capability. We know that they can play that style. If they ever fall off or they're not quite there, it's not that hard for them, apparently, to snap back into place. And obviously that's something that's going to be really crucial and important for them as they try to go on another run.
One of the things I could tell Thursday night from the start, they were off. It just wasn't clicking on Thursday night. And, the more as time progressed during that first period, the more it went on, I in my gut, I just had this bad feeling. They weren't going after loose pucks. They weren't forechecking. And, Bob, when he's on his game, he's on, but when he's off, he's off. And it was just like everything wasn't clicking that night. And then I think one of the frustrating things was, and I noticed this several times, and I wanted to kind of ask you about this as well, is every time the Panthers, it seemed like for at least maybe twice, when the Panthers got a power play, it's like at least 10 seconds later, all of a sudden they're getting called for a penalty. And one of my questions for you is this. I think one of the things that frustrates me a lot as a fan and also doing podcasts and covering the Panthers and hockey in general is the inconsistency with how penalties are called. From one night, this will be a slash. The next night, it's not a slash. I mean, it's just so terribly inconsistent. What are your thoughts about that, David?
Well, it's tough to have any kind of a level of consistency because it's very obviously subjective to each man, and every referee is going to be a little bit different. What gets to me is more when they call a certain way for 40 minutes and then the game shifts a little bit and suddenly what wasn't a penalty in the second period is a penalty in the third, or vice versa. You alluded to, or you mentioned earlier in my podcast with Roy this past week where we kind of got into it a little bit, the whole embellishment thing and the frustration behind that and the inconsistency in that, as you saw in the two Devils games where, the one call on Tkachuk that was, eyebrow raising to say the least. And then you had the non-call when Mikkola, hit Hughes, and Hughes, he's throwing his head back like he just got shot. It's frustrating, but at the end of the day, if it's in the rule book, the official's going to call it. And we, just like in baseball, as frustrating as we can get with the strike zone, especially now when it's like they show you right there what is and isn't a strike. They don't even have that in hockey. It's still subjective to what we think. But at the end of the day, it's very frustrating. It always just kind of takes me back to something that one of my first junior coaches told me, 20 some odd years ago. I remember it vividly. I remember coming into the locker room after a period and the whole team was fuming at the officials. And our coach just came in and he's like, "You're never going to meet a bleeping ref that you like in your life. So stop bitching about him and move on." And, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but however he said it, it just always stuck with me in terms of referees.
Paul has a great style of coaching. I mean, I've been following him for years. That I think one of the things that frustrates him so much is when he knows when the team is just playing well, like they did last night against the Jets, and everything's firing, and then coming into the next game, and then all of a sudden, they kind of lay another egg. I think that has to be terribly frustrating as a head coach. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as a coach, what you're trying to do is to get your team to play, a certain way at a certain level, night in and night out. That's, obviously impossible. It's not going to happen. But you shoot for that, and as a coach, when you don't get that to a level to where it's, one night you're seeing one thing and one night you're seeing another, it can get very frustrating. Fortunately for Florida, I mean, they are an incredibly consistent team on the whole under Paul Maurice, but B, Paul is just such a evolved head coach where, he's been in the NHL. He's been doing this now for over 30 years, since he started in Hartford in the last year of the Whalers. He'll tell you he's much different now than he was back then. And as it should be, if you don't go through a job for 30 years, learning and improving and trying to get better, what are you doing? So the way that he is now just is such a good players coach, and the way that he understands both the game and his team and the game that he's trying to get his team to play. It couldn't have been a better coach in a better situation here in South Florida. And I always point back to Bill Zito and the job he's done both in curating the team, but Zito and Matt Caldwell and those guys, and picking Paul Maurice and bringing him in when a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads like, really, that's the guy who just kind of walked out in Winnipeg and he's a little burnt out. That's the guy. Yeah. Look at that. Just like all the other moves that Zito's made, worked out pretty well.
Well, I'm going to say this, and I'm a little partial to Bill Zito. One of the first things I found out about Bill Zito, he was born and raised in Pittsburgh, and I'm from Pittsburgh. So I was like, okay, that's real. I thought that was pretty cool. He has is what, and this is what I'm kind of alluding to with this Florida Panthers style. Now, I know when you guys had Doug on the show, and he talked about, consistency and that the players that they have, they're consistent and they give consistent results. And, one of the things that I think is that Bill Zito has done is he's evolved this team and gotten it's a special chemistry, if you will. Because I know, and I've talked to other writers here. I've had Colby on, I've had Alex on. I've had George Richards on, and one of the things I think a lot of them have agreed to is, one of the things is, there is just something special about that locker room. The players really, truly get along with each other. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think something's to be said for, foregoing or eschewing a larger contract for having chemistry with a team like the Panthers have. What are your thoughts on that?
It's incredibly unique and special. And I can just say that to the longtime Panthers fans, you've earned and deserve this for what this team has put the fan base through for at least the first 25 years. But it's really special. And I try not to wax poetic too much on it because you want to kind of keep the professional face and all that. But it's incredible. And it's something that whatever sport you're watching, it's something that you strive for. It's a locker room that throughout the league is reputation now as being one of the best, tight knit. The guys love each other. New people are welcomed. But again, it kind of gets into Bill Zito bringing in the right kind of guys, no egos, people who are happy to put the work in to get the victories in the name of success. It's really cool. And like when I think about like, what's another example of something like this happening? And it's a South Florida connection, but I'm open to learning about others. But look what the Miami Heat did when LeBron and Wade and Bosh were here. All three of them took less money so that they could build around them when they could have and would have gotten more elsewhere. And what did they do? They went to 4 consecutive championship series and they won 2 of them. So I think it's pretty cool what the Panthers are doing. And I know that people are, the no state tax in Florida, yada, yada. That's not new in 2020. That's been around as long as the team has been around. So, it's not like suddenly people are realizing that's an advantage. No, they've made this team a destination to where it's a perk of coming to Florida. Oh yeah. And I get that as well. But I think if you're not appreciating this for how cool and special and unique it is, what the team has been built, how good they are, how well they get along, and how sustainable it certainly appears to be, you're doing yourself a disservice because it's really special what's happened down here and what's happening in South Florida. And I just go back to what I said originally. It's something that the longtime fan base deserves, and they've waited a long time for it.
You're so right, David. I mean, it's because I remember one of the first games I took my older son to was back in 1996 when the Penguins played the Panthers in the playoffs. And it was in Pittsburgh. And I was taking him, and I was scratching my head. The Panthers in the playoffs, didn't they just start the team a couple of years ago? I was like, and trying to scramble to find out information about them because, it's like the internet wasn't the internet back then. And you really had to dig through newspaper articles and find out who was who and who was running things then. And, they've really evolved. And, you got to give ownership a lot of credit. First of all, for getting somebody like Bill Zito in, which is, he's unique in and of himself because, starting out as an agent, and I really didn't know Bill Zito's background until a couple of years ago. And it really amazed me how much he relates to the players, to the coaches. And he's just in this zone right here, and how he's not afraid to make bold moves. Okay. And, the boldest move, that I think he's ever made is getting Matthew Tkachuk here. I mean, that was just, everybody says, you're giving up. You got to be kidding me. Okay. It's like, it was off their tongues and it couldn't get off there fast enough. Why are you doing this? And then, it's like hindsight's 2020 with something like that. And one of the questions that I have for you right now is, lately, and I've watched through the past several games, it just seems Matthew Tkachuk's just been off for some reason and not on his game. What are your thoughts about that?
I think with Matthew Tkachuk, if you're not hearing his name a lot, then it's just kind of assumed that he's not on his usual game, right? When I'm looking at Matthew Tkachuk, I'm looking at how his line is performing. And that line has been a little bit like peaks and valleys in the way that they've been scoring, whether it's been Verhaeghe and Bennett on that line. I know they had Boquist on there briefly last week. They're scoring, but they're also getting scored on. And I think that's kind of where, with Matthew Tkachuk, And I don't know, I was going to talk about his defensive play, but really it's not. That line has been put in some funky situations over when I'm thinking, it's kind of replaying the goals in my head. It's not necessarily that they're getting bogged down or that they're getting beat off the rush or anything like that. So with Matthew Tkachuk, I don't know. I don't think he's playing that bad. I haven't noticed anything that said, "Oh, Chucky's struggling." I'm pretty sure he's been finding the score sheet. I think he went like 2 games without scoring a point, and then he got on there against Winnipeg. I don't know. Like, I'll kind of answer your question with a question. Like, what are you looking for out of Matthew Tkachuk to say that he's like on his game in terms of beyond just the score sheet, I guess?
Right. Yeah, that's a real good question. And I think, one of the things that I see when he's really engaged in a game, he's very physical, okay? And he's not shy, especially around the net. And he usually gets in goaltenders' faces quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
And really
nobody's better at pissing off goalies than Chucky.
Oh yeah, he does. He's a great A on that. And I would say probably the past couple of games I really didn't see that. I'm not saying not the games, but the games against the Devils, I really didn't see a lot of that from him. But I'll go back to like the games that they played over in Finland. He was agitating the Stars goalies. I mean, you could tell that to me, that's a bellwether for him. When he's there and he's agitating their goalies, when you see him on that, I think that's one of the things that indicates to me, regardless of score sheet or not, that he's involved in part of the game. And the games against the Devils, I really didn't see that from him because it's like going to our first game and and watching things in person. I was keeping a keen eye because we were down where the Panthers would shoot twice, and I really didn't see that from him. As we advanced in last night's game, I saw him get a little bit more engaged. I saw him, getting in players' faces and things like that. So that's kind of a good thing in my book.
Yeah, I would imagine when he's at his best, at least in terms of what I think, you and I and a lot of people see when he's at his best, which is beyond just scoring, as you were just talking about, which is doing a lot of the intangibles that, why he's who he is and why he's such a valuable player. I think some of those things we haven't noticed them in the last few games. I guess, how much does that reflect on wins and losses in terms of specifically with Matthew Tkachuk? And it's like, as I kind of pose the question to myself right now, it's an interesting one, only because, as I kind of just said, there's so much value that he brings that is nothing to do with putting the puck in the net. It's getting under opponent's skin. It's the two-way game. It's that playoff style. It's physicality. And yeah, we haven't noticed it that much. I can't say this for sure. So I've been kind of holding back over the last minute or two. Like, I think, and I don't know this, but I think there's been a bug going through the team just over the last week or so. Like, I've kind of felt like a couple of guys sounded like they were under the weather. I don't know. And I don't like to ask or poke around or, when it comes to injuries and illnesses and stuff like that, because it's such a flaky topic. But just, it wouldn't surprise me, I guess is the point I was trying to make, if it turns out that he may have been battling something just because of maybe him playing at a not quite 100 point, what he normally is. So, and I'm totally speculating right now, but that could be a reason why, because it would be one thing that I guess would make sense.
Okay. Yeah, and that's entirely possible. Paul has said so often, he says, he looks at a season as a marathon and not a sprint. And of course, there's going to be a lot of ebbs and flows. You're going to have games like you did against the Devils, and then you're going to rebound. And, that kind of, that kind of thing is expected through the course of a year. And it's a long year. Spencer Knight, and I know a lot of people, it's like a lot of people, you either love him or you don't love him. And what are your thoughts on Spencer Knight and his role with the Panthers?
Oh, I'm excited to see him back kind of on the track and on the path that he was on, a couple of years ago. He's a great young goaltender. He seems to have a good head on his shoulders right now. He's having fun, smiling a lot, enjoying himself. Now it's just going to be in terms of, is his play on the ice going to catch up? And for the most part this season, he's looked pretty good. I mean, neither he or Bob looked particularly great last week against the Devils. But with Spencer Knight, I think kind of as what you just said in terms of Paul Maurice and his viewpoint on the season, I think with Spencer Knight, considering this is his first year back in the NHL after not being in the league basically at all last year, unless you count like when he came up and he was practicing with them at the end of the playoffs. but in terms of playing in the NHL regularly, not since February of 23 when he left the team and joined the player assistance program. So I think I'm more looking at the larger sample size with Spencer. So far, I think, passing with flying colors. He's looked fine on the ice. He's been everything off the ice has been good for him. So as long as he can continue on that path, we're all good. I think he needs to continue to get better. I think where he's at right now, he's not ready to be that next guy, that heir apparent, whatever you want to call it. Certainly the skill is there. The ceiling is very high with him. His athleticism is kind of off the charts. He's got a very compact, simplistic style, which I think will be very beneficial over the course of a long career because you can build off of that instead of trying to rein it in. But right now, where he's at, I think he's where he should be. We just need to continue seeing a steady, consistent process, just if you want him to continue to progress like that. But I think I wasn't sure what to expect heading into the season. I was excited based on how he finished with Charlotte last year, but that was a while ago, right? That's like 6, 7, 8 months ago now we're talking about. So to see him get back into a kind of a groove here in the NHL, it's good. What I'd really like to see is for him to like rein off some really solid starts. I get that that's difficult for a goaltender in his position because he's playing so sporadically, not in the greatest positions. I thought playing him against the Devils was good because it wasn't on the second night of a back-to-back. It wasn't on the road. The team was rested. Unfortunately, nobody looked good that night. But I think that was kind of a sign that Paul Maurice, more so Rob Tallis, are trying to get him into more situations, unlike like last year with Anthony Stolarz, where Stoli just excelled no matter what you threw at him, no matter what the situation was, what night, where they were, didn't matter. With Spencer, I think being a little bit more thoughtful in that regard is good on both for him and for the team. I think that the Devils game was a clue to that. But again, I just want to see him kind of continue on that process and that path, and that'll keep me excited.
Yeah, and I agree with you, David. And one of the things I noticed, the team seems to amp up their defense when he's in net. And I think it's great for them to do that because I think that helps boost his confidence. And I see slowly but surely, I think he's evolving to where he needs to be. And I agree with you, he's not there yet, but I think he'll get there. And I think, Paul will be very cognizant, especially because, one of the things with Bobrovsky is, the more he plays, the better he is. I mean, that's just, that's been through, throughout his career. It's really been a hallmark for him. So, I'm really, really excited and hopeful for Spencer, and I want to see him continue to progress like he's getting progress like he has been. One of the things that was real interesting was, somebody asked me what I thought of the game Thursday night, because it was our first game that we went to. And I told him, I said, well, there was a great fight. It was right in front of us. And then when the final horn sounded in the third period, because the game was over. And I get a lot of opinions, and I've talked to a lot of the writers like yourself, and asked them about fighting. Because, for example, I think last night, Aaron Ekblad got into a fight. And it's like, and I remember Goldie was saying something like, you don't want to see this. Or I know it was Goldie or Randy. You don't want to see somebody like that get into a fight because you don't want them to get hurt. What's your opinion of fighting in the NHL? Is that something that should stay, or should it be more regulated? Or what are your thoughts about that?
I'm good with fighting in the NHL. I think it's one of the things that makes hockey the unique sport that it is. It's not like you see a situation where guys are getting hurt or there's something's happening that's diminishing the game, whether it's from a team or from a player standpoint or anything like that. What I do have a problem with lately is what leads to fighting. I think it's becoming a little too common, just in terms of like a big hit and suddenly you got to drop the gloves, or these things that are more common in the game are leading to the fights, which I think could send you down a bit of a slippery slope in terms of if the fighting starts going up and up and up when it really shouldn't. And then it kind of ties you back into what, whether it was Goldie or Randy talking about a guy like Ekblad fighting. You don't want your key players to be fighting, A, because God forbid they do get hurt, and B, because then you're forfeiting 5 minutes of their time. A guy like Ekblad, he's playing, 22, 23 minutes a night, whatever it is. So that's a big chunk to be without him. That's why you don't really see, go back to the playoffs last year when Tkachuk and Pasternak fought, and everybody loved it, but both coaches were like, at that point the game's over, but you don't want to see your star players do that. So I get it. But at the end of the day, fighting is just part of the game. And every so often, when a guy gets pissed, they know it's an option. I don't think we're going to be seeing like Sasha Barkov dropping the gloves anytime soon or anything like that.
Yeah.
But when it happened with Ekblad, I was surprised to learn, as I looked it up, that was his 11th fight in the league. And granted, he's been in the league for, a decade now, but you don't think of Ekblad as a guy who's fighting that often. So to hear that he's been fighting, once or twice a season, okay, cool. It was his first fight since I think 2022. But again, in hockey, it's part of what makes the game cool. Is it's very physical. It's very not personal, but in terms of personal space. So to have that option to release that aggression, yeah, I'm cool with it. And side note, goalie fights are awesome.
Oh yeah, but I agree with you as far as fighting is concerned. I think I think it's a part of the game. I enjoy it when it's, as long as as long as it doesn't get out of hand. When it gets out of hand, that's when officials step in, and usually they do. One of my other questions is, and I know a lot of people have talked about it, that the NHL playoff format needs to be revised because it's just not right. What are your thoughts about that, David?
I'm one of them. I miss the whole 1-8, 2-7 matchup that I grew up with. I don't really. What I don't like about the current format is that you're kind of playing the same teams every year, and I don't know. Part of the thing that's cool about the playoffs is that you get to have these super intense, crazy series with teams that you're not traditionally rivals with, and the playoffs kind of can manufacture those rivalries. I mean, obviously Tampa and Florida, right? They played against each other. Their whole existences for both teams. They've been butting heads. They didn't really become true rivals until they started playing against each other in the playoffs, and that's when things really kicked up a notch. So I'd like to see that kind of get back to an expanded thing. I also just think parity wise, it'll make for a better playoff, but the league seems pretty intent on keeping things the way they are. They like, for travel reasons, and they've got their reasons why they want to keep it the way it is. But I do miss that whole 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5 matchup. I thought that was pretty neat. I think we weren't complaining about anything back then, and now we're not really too crazy about this. So I wouldn't mind seeing it go back.
I agree with you 100% because it's like, oh, okay, guess who we're playing again? And as far as the season is concerned, I know a lot of people say, my gosh, look how long it was. It was June 24th, the Panthers win the cup. And, and I'm like, June 24th. I mean, it's like, seriously, it's like you sneeze and then the season's going to start again. What do you think about shortening the NHL schedule or starting the season sooner or something along those lines so it doesn't end like in the last week of June?
I'm for shortening the preseason and starting the regular season earlier. If that would be a solution, I think maybe it's the easiest one that people would get behind, just because, I mean, the NHL preseason is kind of a joke because the majority of the games, you're not seeing any actual NHL players play. And it's a cool opportunity for the guys that do get to play. And I understand that, because that's, I was trying to be one of those fringe guys trying to get up in a league that they didn't necessarily belong in or whatever. But I agree that June 24th was really late. It wasn't fun finishing the final and then turning around for the draft like 2 days later, literally. Like, it was nuts. So maybe that'll be a solution that they look at. I don't know. I know like in the NFL, they clipped off a preseason game and they could probably do it, taking off one more. It's just something that I feel like was one of the more traditional things about sports that kind of came with the league. Preseason games, exhibition games, whatever, warm-up games. But nowadays, like the way that teams manage them and try to keep their players sheltered, they're becoming less and less, that more and more pointless, I guess. And so maybe that's a solution that they would think about. But I agree that June 24th, mid to late June, is way too late. So whether you're shortening it by 10 games, which I don't really want to shorten this season, I'd rather just start it earlier. But we'll see if that's something they look into. But as we all know, changes don't come easy with these leagues.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's one of these things, and I kind of understand where things are because of expansion and things like that, and I get it, and I understand it as well, and I agree. I think starting the season, a few weeks earlier I think will eliminate, a June 24th Stanley Cup celebration. I mean,
Yeah.
really,
Unfortunately, it won't cut the off season because you start earlier, you end earlier, so it's not really helping the players that much. But if they at least want to change, like shift a little bit in terms of the way the calendar is, which I think maybe having a longer summer might help. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's going to be really hard to come up with a solution that everybody's cool with and that works for everybody. But
yeah, and it's like everybody. It's like, well, yeah, that's what it is, and that's the way it's going to be. And you got to get the Players Association on board with things, and it's a constant nightmare. It's like being a commissioner of a league, especially Gary Bettman. Love him or hate him. I mean, he has a difficult job. I mean, I do not envy him. He has to keep owners happy. He has to keep players happy. He wants to keep fans happy. I mean, he's a guy. No thanks. I mean, it's just not there. I guess the last question that I'm going to ask is this tonight. Do you think the Panthers can get into a favorable position again to make another playoff run for this season?
Yeah, there's no reason why they wouldn't. Arguably a little bit more complete, deeper roster than they had a year ago. If you want to go there, just in terms of the forward depth that they have, a guy like Uvis Balinskis emerging. So you could, as long as they stay healthy, there's no reason to think otherwise. Like obviously Sergei Bobrovsky has proven over the last few years that he is at a level that he can absolutely handle a playoff run. And, as you mentioned earlier, he wants to work more. He thrives under that situation. So you don't have to really be concerned about the goaltending. And Paul Maurice, I think, is kind of the key there. He knows how to manage a team, as we've seen over the last 2.5 years. He's managed them very well to get them to a certain point and to have them. The way that the Panthers play, you talked about it earlier, the style, it's very difficult and it's something that they've mastered. But teams, they come in here and they're like, God, they worked so hard night in and night out. And Paul Maurice talks about wanting to get to a certain emotional level for every game that's very hard to get to. And if anybody's going to be able to manage it, it's him. So I think being that they're a pretty solid team right now in the regular season, they're setting themselves up to where it looks like they're going to be a playoff team. Obviously, right now they're pretty comfortable in that situation. But so as long as they can maintain, I think between the depth and the talent on the roster and the guy behind the bench, no reason why this team can't be a sustainable playoff team, not just this year, but for years to come, and be a force. It's a little strange to say because we're still talking about the Panthers, and yeah, they've won a Stanley Cup. It's crazy. It's still the Panthers. So it's like, yeah, they're going to be good for a while. Really? Yes, they're going to be good for a while. As long as they stay healthy and that they don't get any, crazy bad luck, this team is pretty set. So I think right now, and Paul Maurice said when he signed his contract, he's like, yeah, I didn't look at the number. You want to keep me? You want to keep paying me to do this? Cool. I'm in. So it's just a great situation all around. And, at the end of the day, pat Paul Maurice on the back, you go up a tier, you pat Bill Zito and Matt Caldwell and all the way up to Vinny Viola and Doug Sifu. They've invested in this team and it's just paying off, and it's been a beautiful thing to see.
Oh, and I could not agree more. And, we as followers of the Panthers and fans of the Panthers are excited for what the future holds. Cause I know, it's not like this for every NHL team. And, I think we really have something special with these guys. And David, I want to thank you for not only for attending the podcast, but also for the great work you do, not only for the Hockey News, but your podcast. You guys do a great job. You really knock it out of the park there. Keep up the great work with that. Everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening today. And as always, remember, it's a great day for Florida Panthers hockey. Time to hunt.